Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, May 16th, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Laura Carlsen. She's the director of the Americas program at the Center for International Policy. We're talking about the first several months of the AMLO's presidency. Mexico's progressive president, where he's moving the ball forward on labor and wages, a new push to decriminalize drugs, plus Trump's war on refugees and immigrants, looking at the other side of the wall of the Trump administration's assault and white supremacy. John Bolton and Trump are in a different place on Iran tensions. Apparently, Donald Trump is getting fed up with Mike Pompeo and John Bolton's rush for conflict and catastrophic war with Iran. He's having Iraq anxiety. Let's reflect on the fact that Donald Trump has more sane instincts than his two prime national security people. Let that sink in.
It's Republicans, folks.
It's Republicans, folks. Of course, also Trump is an unstable baby and has been rolled by his advisors before. Trump's immigration plan that he will run for on re-election is going to emphasize skills over family ties, even as new rules roll out that would strip birthright, disenfranchise children of LGBT families. Horrifying move. Over 1 million hit the streets in mass protests in Brazil against the Bolsonaro regime's efforts to eliminate philosophy, sociology departments, and savage science spending. They have Republicans there too, and they're meeting them with mass demonstrations. Donald Trump feels the heat as his trade war with China is hurting farmers. He readies a $20 billion fund. But some of that money has actually already gone to, similar money has gone to bail out Brazilian agricultural oligarchs. As those ties continue, the Trump administration is also censoring and erasing references to the Affordable Care Act on federal government websites. The Missouri Senate readies their own fundamental assault not only on women's health but their basic sovereignty and rights with a new abortion bill, as Pat Robertson questions not the ethics or the extremism of the Alabama bill, the political and legal efficacy of it, contrary to credulous headlines. A toddler who was apprehended. Think of how disgusting that sentence is.
We got him.
We got a 2.5-year-old Guatemalan boy who was apprehended at the Mexico-U.S. border, died Tuesday night after several weeks in a hospital. Texas has used money from the Help America Vote Act to pay for its botched voter citizenship review. And the Met Museum will stop taking donations from the opioid crisis fueling Sackler family.
Protest works.
Protest works. Folks. Bernie Sanders hitting the trail, calling out the oil and gas industry. Joe Biden heading to New York to gobble up oligarch money as his dreary corporatist coronation goes through the nation. And Elizabeth Warren, unfortunately, reaffirms her commitment to great green policies by anchoring it in ongoing U.S. military domination, which might echo her troubling votes for defense increases, all that and much, much more on today's Majority Report. Folks, the three of us are here. And we have obviously a lot to get to. Donald Trump clearly enjoys nothing more than being in campaign mode. You have this dysfunctional White House populated by disturbed, twisted, really sick, grotesque people. Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Stephen Miller, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And then you have this, this very unstable, needy baby bouncing off the walls. He does have an instinct of how to campaign. And I think it's really, and his perception of and the adulation of the crowd, I think is really the only part that he actually really enjoys about this. And his instincts obviously take him to xenophobia and every other kind of bigotry, as well as false populism. And he's taking aim at the Green New Deal. He's taking aim at ecological policies. Of course, as with every single Republican, Donald Trump has raged an unrelenting war on species, on air, on water, on basic public safety. And of course, his EPA head, I believe, recently just said he's not losing sleep over carbon dioxide concentration. But Donald Trump is losing sleep about one thing that has to do with the environment. Check this out. He's at a campaign rally in Louisiana talking to about the wonders of natural gas and his apparent huge affection for birds.
Under the Green New Deal, they don't like clean, beautiful natural gas. They don't like anything. They don't know what they like. They sort of like wind, even though it kills all the birds. You want to see a bird cemetery? Go under a windmill sometime.
He is such an idiot.
So it's true that birds are killed by...
the fact? Yes, so birds are sometimes killed by windmills, yes.
Yeah,
which
it looks
is terrible.
Like numbers, estimates, I mean, from a few years ago, it was about 250,000.
That's a lot.
Sure, I just lost the thing. Hold on, let me find this again.
Okay, so basically, Donald Trump is going, of course, as I say, this is an administration that is doing its all to strip away protections in every single environmental category. It's making it easier for coal companies to pollute. It's removing even the most modest restrictions on oil and gas. And of course, natural gas, I mean, I guess everybody is subjectively free to think of it as beautiful, but it is in fact also profoundly dangerous and environmentally harmful to water, for starters.
Yes, this was from 5 years ago. Wind turbines kill between 214,000 and 368,000 birds annually, a small fraction compared with the estimated 6.8 million fatalities from collisions with cell and radio towers.
Ooh.
And guess how many deaths from from cats?
How many deaths from cats?
2 billion?
That's just nailed it. It's between 1.4 billion and 3.7 billion. So,
Jesus.
also,
insane.
cats are good.
Cats are on a fucking rampage. Excuse my language. I'm sorry, but that's a lot.
Solidarity with the birds. Forget cats.
No, I'm on Team Cat.
You're on Team Cat?
Team bird.
Team bird. I'm a bird watcher, folks. So
one
he's
cat,
back in mode.
One cat is like 80 wind turbines.
One cat is like 80 wind turbines. And meanwhile, the side benefit of the turbines is that we're not cooking our planet, and we might have some ability to survive as a species. And actually, that same ability to survive as a species also affects the beautiful birds, because they don't do well with choking on polluted air either, and having the global planetary weather systems, the global weather patterns completely uprooted and destroyed by endless oil drilling and Bolsonaro's plans for the Amazon, supported by fossil fuel companies and Wall Street, and of course Trump and the Republicans.
I don't think mass extinctions of different kinds of bird species is included in this in Trump's calculus.
Got to stay very specific. Very specific. All right, folks. We don't have any ads to do today, so I will just say that, of course, this show is made possible by you. Over 90% by you even as the ads roll in. So become a member today, majority.fm/become a member. Keep us free and independent. We're going to come back in a few minutes with Laura Carlson. We're going to be talking about AMLO. We're going to be talking about the border as viewed from the other side, as this, quite literally, I mean, a absolutely fake crisis, which has turned into a real crisis of human cost generated by all the endless obscenities of the Trump administration with regards to the border. We'll be back with Laura Carlson. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks here. Joining us now is Laura Carlson. She's the director of the Americas program at the Center for International Policy, and she's based in Mexico City. Laura, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Michael, for the invitation.
So I want to start by asking you about the Trump administration's war on refugees and immigrants as seen from outside. I mean, seen specifically from the Mexican side or the Latin American side. We report on it on this show. There's certainly, it's covered in the kind of mainstream media, I think, very much in terms of the sort of different political calculations playing out. And there are some people who will, call out the obvious racism and fear-mongering of the policies. And I think other outlets focus more specifically on how the crisis is completely sort of hysteria and self-generated and fake. But by acting from a place of this, this fake crisis has, I guess, created a real crisis in terms of refugee populations and also people on the other side of the border, as well as people getting detained here. I mean, we did top line a 2-year-old boy from Guatemala just died after spending weeks in the hospital after being apprehended, which is just such an incredible word to use with a toddler at the border. So you've been covering this, you looking at this, you have a very deep understanding of it. What does it look like from the other side, as it were?
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, that was the 4th child who's died in ICE custody. And as you mentioned, we've looked at the aspects of how this serves for Republican and especially Trump-Miller politics. We've looked at the aspects of detention, but perhaps, and I think this is very clear to everyone south of the border, the most important part of this policy is the downright human cruelty that it involves. Right now, you're talking to me in Tijuana at the border in Mexico, where I've been the last couple of days doing some investigation and reporting on what happens to these people, who's coming up, who's coming back, because as you know, there's a new policy now to send people back to await their asylum hearings, and what kind of stories they tell about this. One of the most impressive things has been that the individuals are talking about the kind of treatment they receive after they relinquish, they basically, the asylum process, it's important for people to understand because it's much different than undocumented immigrants. People are actually going to the border and they're presenting themselves to immigration officials and asking for asylum, which is an international right that's guaranteed under a number of different international human rights pacts that even the United States has signed on to. So these people are taken into custody, and they're talking about acts that can only be described as torture when in ICE custody. Particularly, there's a part of the process that's called the hielera, or the ice box in Spanish. And the ice box is where they literally throw people into a room that's freezing, and they keep them there for a certain amount of time. Their explanation for why this room is freezing is that it's supposed to keep contaminants or insects, or I don't know, some kind of, again, that image of immigrants as a form of contagion. Right. And here we're talking about human beings, but they keep them in there. And we just talked to a couple of people who said that they were in there from 10 to 12 days, and they take their jackets in many cases as well. And then they'll be in there, and they'll just be finally able, shivering, to go to sleep, and the agents will come in and wake them up, which again is a torture tactic, sleep deprivation, that's used in interrogation and that's used in some of the worst authoritarian and totalitarian states in history.
So, and I guess I want to there's so much to get to, and it just is appalling. It's disgusting. But remind everybody, what is the context for a lot of these people coming? And again, I think that's very important. It's one thing, obviously, there needs to be, I would support amnesty for undocumented people in the United States. That's another, it's a connected and linked conversation, and it's important. But these are people, yes, fleeing situations and going through a formal process of asylum. What are those situations, I guess, particularly in Central America, but there's also people obviously from Mexico, there's people from Haiti at the border. And what are the U.S. policy roles in those crises? Even down to undermining some really interesting work that was done several years ago in El Salvador to sort of soothe gang violence that ran counter to kind of U.S. tough on crime policy there, quote unquote tough on crime policy. What's the context? What are people fleeing? And, and just to really underline that these are absolutely refugee status people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very important to understand each country has a different history But there are common threads through that, and one of those common threads is precisely U.S. foreign policy in the past. U.S. foreign policy has created many of the crises of violence and other forms of violence that we talk about less often and that don't fit as neatly into silent categories, which are extreme hunger, displacement, internal displacement, and constant threats from the security forces themselves. The violence we're looking at is both criminal violence and state violence. You can go country by country and break it down and see why people are forced to flee. And you hear it all the time. We hear it all the time in the stories that the people tell us about their cases. Let's just look at some very concrete examples. In El Salvador, yesterday we talked to two Salvadorans who have already gone to the United States. They've asked for asylum under the Remain in Mexico program, which is insane. They send them back to Tijuana, the most dangerous city in Mexico, according to the recent statistics that came out. And they're waiting here for sometimes their third, fourth, fifth court hearing to see what will happen with their case in the United States. One individual was drafted to join the Salvadoran army. He actually therefore became a target of the gangs. He actually has a bullet in his hand and another in his hip. And yet when he's gone up for his asylum hearings in the United States, they haven't even allowed him to present yet his personal evidence for why his life is under threat back in El Salvador. There's another man who said very clearly, if I go back from Honduras, if I go back, they'll kill me. I won't last a week in Honduras because of, again, a problem with gangs. In El Salvador, the roots of the gang violence in the United States are very clear. These are gangs that were bred in Los Angeles. Then there was a massive deportation program of Salvadorans, many of whom had no experience living in El Salvador, and they reproduced the kind of violence that they'd grown up with in Los Angeles. And it became an even more virulent form of violence in El Salvador, where the problems of poverty that are still, and the problems of fear and violence that are still a result of the death squad area, again, supported by U.S. policies, are very much still prevalent and felt there. And then you have these programs where they say, okay, let's try something that's not fighting violence with violence. Let's try something that looks at reinsertion, that looks at rehabilitation of gang members, that looks at giving them other options besides crime. And that was completely rejected by the United States government, those kinds of truces or other kinds of arrangement. And they still have a policy where they won't even talk about what to do with young people who are in gangs and how you can look at programs that would make them productive members of society. Yet when you talk to many of these people, it's not a life that they choose. It's a life that's been left to them. And then both them and the victims, because we're talking about, it's a huge and a blurry picture there than the members of the people who are actually in crime, in gangs, their families, the way that crosses over into businesses, the way that it creates victims. It's a whole structure in which oftentimes, and especially in countries like Mexico and El Salvador, you can't really tell even the good guys from the bad guys. There's so many people here in Mexico, government officials and security forces that are working with organized crime, that it's impossible to even draw the lines clearly there. Mm-hmm. Then you look at Honduras, and you have U.S. support for the 2009 coup there that destroyed constitutional government and has created a situation where democratic institutions simply do not function. You can't expect the government, the police forces to protect you. And in fact, in many cases, they may be precisely the forces that are persecuting the people who are fleeing. There's daily demonstrations against what's considered an illegitimate government, again, supported by the United States of Juan Orlando Hernandez. And so you have these very deep structural problems in these countries that nobody's talking about, and the victims of these problems are being re-victimized as they come up to the United States seeking safety for themselves and their families and are treated as criminals or worse.
So, and in this moment, I want to transition to AMLO. So we have this the direct link between. I mean, and obviously you can put these policies back decades and decades. Starting wherever you like, right? Like the U.S. coup in Guatemala against Arbenz in the 1950s, and now it's all sort of, the reversal of the pink tide starting in Honduras in 2009 with the Obama administration backing that coup against Manuel Zelaya you just talked about. And now it's intersecting with this, this acceleration, this particularly obscene Republican administration policy, which I always say, I think there's a strategic dimension to making sure that you keep a certain demographic in the electorate. I think that, there is some real strategy here from a Republican political perspective. And then I cover a lot. People will laugh. You can take your drink at this point. You have, a great president like Lula, I think undoubtedly in prison and politically chumped up charges, and this huge reversal in Brazil with Bolsonaro. U.S. efforts in Venezuela, and AMLO really is a distinction from that very negative trend. So not to glorify him or put him on a pedestal, but I do think a lot of us are looking at him as definitely a progressive counterweight and one of the only sort of potential political bright spots electorally right now in Latin America. Of course, there's always very powerful social movements. So maybe you could start. We could go to several different areas, but but I'll just start broad. How is it, and maybe particularly in relation to these policies in Central America and this war on refugees and so on, how is your perception of AMLO's first several months in power so far, and what would be the main areas you think we should be judging him on or thinking about it on?
Yeah, well, since you started with the geopolitical, that this was one of the few elections in an extremely powerful country, one of the biggest economies in the region, that went left instead of going hard right, we can start there. And so what that means, so far we have seen a real shift in the geopolitics, mainly because, for example, and this is an important example, in the showdown on Venezuela, where the Organization of American States, under right-wing Trump puppet, basically, Almagro is taking a hard line for intervention in Venezuela, and other countries are as well. The Mexican government has taken a firm stance for mediation and dialogue, and saying that it will help no one for U.S. intervention to try to resolve what's an internal matter in Venezuela. We also have Mexican government taking a firm stance against hardening the embargo against Cuba. And so we see real differences there. On the immigration issue, it's been much more mixed. The administration of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO as he's called, has been very, very careful about the relationship with the Donald Trump administration, despite the fact that it's been a Mexico-bashing administration since the campaign, that it takes every possible opportunity to insult the country as a whole. There's so much economic dependency between Mexico and the United States, and not just in trade directly, but particularly from financial markets. One decision by the unelected and illegitimate forces that run the financial markets, and the peso can drop, and the investment rating can fall, and all of a sudden every plan for trying to create a stronger and more equal economy here in Mexico can go out the window, and they're very aware of this. And so this is not a justification. I think that they've gone way further than they needed to or than they should have in terms of placating an administration which could very possibly be called neo-fascist in the United States. But that's kind of what's happening. And on immigration, we see it, unfortunately, very clearly. At the beginning, there were strong declarations that they would be taking another another tack on immigration. They'd be looking to the root causes. There'd be less crackdown. There'd be less criminalization. There'd be an effort to try to create a situation where people don't have to flee their home countries, whether they be Central America or Mexico, because there still is immigration from Mexico, and it's important. And there's still refugees coming out of Mexico as well. The violence has gone up here, unfortunately. And then after that, we began to see Trump's threats to close the border, and we began to see the Mexican government responding with more crackdown on immigrants, with policies that seemed very erratic between the declarations of human rights and what was actually happening to Central Americans who were coming up through the country. So now everybody, between Trump's decrees, from one day to the next, that oftentimes people in U.S. agencies don't even know how to apply. And what's happening here with this ambivalence between placating the Trump administration and trying to, respect in some senses human rights of migrants, what we have is just a real mess. Nobody even knows what they're doing, and there's thousands and thousands of families that are caught in the middle.
So how do you take as a really positive signal then in the last couple of days, this rejection of money for the Merida initiative, I believe it's called, and this talk of reshaping, basically stopping participating in the U.S.-backed drug war, which has fueled so much of the violence and instability in Latin America? Not in the sense, obviously, they're connected, but not the same issue, but that this is maybe one area where in the first several months, the Obrador administration has been willing to start going in a direction of directly confronting, not only Trump, that would seem to me to be very bipartisan U.S. consensus foreign policy. A lot of this accelerated, in my understanding, under the Calderon and Obama in terms of this real radical escalation of militarization of drug conflict in Mexico, and U.S. support for, basically just these standard, highly militarized, extremely violent policies. So does that give you, first of all, what is he actually proposing? And does that give you some hope that maybe the next phase here might mean more confrontation?
Yes, we consider it absolutely good news that López Obrador came out and said the Merida Initiative is over. Now, just saying it does not mean that the Merida Initiative or the drug war are over. So we have to see what happens after that. But there have been grassroots organizations in the United States and almost every major victims organization, that is to say, victims of drug war assassinations, and the many organizations that exist of family members of the disappeared here in Mexico have come out specifically against the Merida Initiative. The Merida Initiative is the vehicle for the drug war imposed by the United States on Mexico. It's the violence against violence kind of a strategy we were talking about that has exploded the violent rate here in Mexico to homicide rates that we never even imagined we'd be seeing in many of the cities across the country. So changing that strategy has been a principal demand of organizations on both sides of the border, and it's a very good sign that that's been announced. Now, for that to actually happen, we need to see a demilitarization of everything, and that's where there's been some questions. López Obrador announced a National Guard. The National Guard is supposed to be more civilian, and yet he's announced an Army general to be the head of it. Now, there's some limitations on what the armed forces could do, because one of the first things that has to be done is the gradual withdrawal of the armed forces from domestic security. It's basic in the United States, and every major international human rights organization has said that the armed forces are trained for something different. They should not be involved in criminal policing. So we have to see how fast that actually happens. And then in terms of the United States, the Pentagon has really taken over under the Merida Initiative, the U.S.-Mexico relationship. Now, there's a lot of organizations, or a number of organizations in Washington, like WOLA and others, it's the Washington Office on Latin America, who have argued that the Merida Initiative is now a benign police and judicial training program primarily because a lot of that direct military funding then went into international narcotics where it was going to these programs. But what we see here in Mexico is that it's still a drug war and it's still feeding the same violence against violence model that has caused so much human tragedy here in the country. Even when you're training police, you're training them in that same kind of a model, and there have been no positive results in terms of human rights or in terms of ending impunity here in the country.
I want to get back to AMLO's record in a second, and we can end on a focus on issues around social investment and labor rights and austerity. But I just briefly, if we could go on this track for a second too, I mean, what is also the relationship between the various cartel factions and different political parties? And even, there was reporting a couple of years ago that the DEA was sort of in different political arrangements with different cartels to sort of share intelligence and then maybe sort of, treat them differently than others. Again, that's not particularly surprising or exceptional. I mean, we certainly work with heroin traffickers in Afghanistan. We definitely informally worked with, the rival cartel of Pablo Escobar as an example. There's nothing particularly exceptional about it, but I think it also illustrates, if I'm right, and you'll correct me obviously if I'm wrong, the other dimension that we're helping fuel all this incredible violence when, as you said before, even structurally figuring out, who is on what side and disaggregate. I mean, the politicians implementing these programs forced by the United States could be partners with different cartels, and U.S., foreign policy could be sort of informally aligned with different cartels depending on, different arrangements. I mean, is that also a dimension of what's going on?
That's definitely a dimension. I've done in-depth work on the DEA in Mexico and in Latin America in general. And I remember once I was interviewing an investigative reporter here in Mexico who has worked a lot on the poppy growing region in Guerrero and other states, which is now, one of the biggest problems with illicit substances. And he said, why do you think they call it the Drug Enforcement Administration? They administer the illegal drug trade. They don't fight it, they administer it, And there were often times where it's not something that you can, like smoking gun, prove, but there were often times when we said, okay, we can see that there's a crackdown on one cartel and a certain favoring of the other. That they're looking to be able to deal with either a larger cartel so they can have a single negotiation, or there was clearly favoritism in terms of how that came down. And the DEA, by its way of working with inside informants, what they have is they will actually protect and encourage criminals within the organizations on the theory that they're going for a bigger fish. But sometimes, the ones they're protecting are actually bigger than the fish they end up getting. And in the meantime, they're actually working with, homicidal maniacs. Mm-hmm. So again, that good guy, bad guy line, it's completely non-existent in that sense. The reason that the violence has gone up so much with this model is also what they call the kingpin strategy. So the kingpin strategy says, okay, if we take out the leader of the drug lord, the main guy in these cartels, then they'll gradually fall apart.
El Chapo. That's why everybody focuses on the El Chapo. And not only does it never happen.
And look what happened to Sinaloa.
Right.
The violence and the strength of the Sinaloa cartel after the capture of El Chapo was worse. Or even worse cartels took over some of their territory. And again, the violence always goes up when you take out a drug lord. Not to say that they shouldn't prosecute criminals, but you have to consider what the impact is on society. It creates instability. It sometimes fragments the cartels, and those smaller ones they even prey in a worse way on the communities in which they have control. than the other ones. So the impact as they herald having captured, in this macho language, another drug lord, the impact on communities and on civil society is terrible. And
they're also not, it's funny because it seems to me like in the reporting and even in pop culture, it's like there's this acknowledgement that these cartels are very sophisticated, that they're embedded in the global economy. If we get into how they wash their money, it would implicate, and as in the past, we know with HSBC, it could implicate like major Western financial institutions. And so there's this understanding on some level that like these are their own this is just part of globalization. This is just sort of illegal globalization, and it's very sophisticated. It's very mobile. It's but then on the other hand, it is sort of like, oh yeah, but if Jeff Bezos quit tomorrow, Amazon would still exist, and Amazon would still have an incredible power. So there is that kind of funny contradiction of, on one hand, sort of emphasizing the sophistication of these cartels, but then, yeah, right, it's always, oh no, if you get rid of El Chapo, then you're good. If you get rid of Escobar, you're good. When, as you said, not necessarily, it might even cause even further instability, and it won't disrupt these supply chains.
Yeah, when you look at the absolute lack of positive results from the model, the counter narcotics, the drug war model that exists, eventually you have to ask yourself, what are the ulterior motives here? Mm-hmm. Because nobody would continue with a model that was so completely failed if there wasn't somebody benefiting from it. And that's when you begin to see what kind of contracts are coming out, the defense companies, the security companies, the lucrative State Department and Mexican government contracts that come out of keeping a country in a state of permanent war. We have a war economy. We have a defense economy in many senses. Donald Trump is trying to increase that. And that's what happens with Mexico. They were beginning to be afraid that there'd be a wind down in the Middle East, and suddenly the drug war appears as the new frontier in terms of who can economically benefit. And then also the Pentagon had long wanted to have greater penetration in Mexico, but even under the corrupt and authoritarian pre-government, it had a strong nationalist vein that didn't permit, the United States government to be as involved in Mexico's national security. So when the drug war comes along with a very weak and contested presidency of Felipe Calderón, they just threw the doors open. And if you're the first thing that you'll hear about the drug war in Mexico is that the Pentagon's just thrilled with it, because they've never had so much access. So you see these Washington national security priorities being imposed on Mexico to the point that, the Southern Command of the Pentagon is on the Mexico-Guatemala border, repressing immigrants that are trying to come up, because that's what the U.S. government wants it to do.
So looping it back to the war on immigrants and refugees. How, in the last couple of minutes, what about on the sort of labor, increasing social investment, the sort of classic? Because my understanding is that AMLO is some type of kind of good social democratic kind of left, sort of soft nationalist kind of political force. What about on just those issues of, if you are middle class, or certainly if you're poor or you're working class in Mexico, is your life starting to improve a bit in this presidency? Or is there greater room that's being opened for, as an example, independent labor union organizing and things like that?
Yeah, well, so far, there's some people who have seen immediate improvement. The minimum wage on the border, on the northern border, was doubled to create a strip where the idea was to try to keep more people from feeling that they had to migrate or attempt to migrate to the United States. There's also been a raise in minimum wage nationally. And the rest, mostly not being felt. There have been some operational glitches. Some of the pensions that were promised to youth and older people are still not being delivered, efficiently. But supposedly that will come under control eventually. And on the labor front, some of the reforms that are going into effect, yes, should have a very positive impact. There was a huge problem, and there is a huge problem with protective contracts, what they call. It's when a union, or kind of a fake union in a sense, goes in and there's a contract with the owners of a company that the workers don't even know about. They have no idea what it even says. And basically that contract exists to keep any kind of real representative contract from winning in that workplace. So they're beginning to go after that kind of thing in terms of, guaranteeing more labor organizing rights. There's a possibility a lot of these kinds of changes are still at the stage of space, as you say, and of possibilities. And the one important thing, and this is kind of a concern, is that people will have to continue to be organized and to pressure the government in order for this to happen. This is not all going to happen the way it should just from the top down. And the concern is that the López Obrador government so far has had a negative attitude toward organization of civil society, and actually has been trying to close off, not through direct repression, but closing off some spaces for that to happen. So I think, the one of the biggest factors in whether or not this can turn out to be a real progressive center-left government that becomes an example for the rest of the region is how organized and how much the people themselves push during the next 5 years.
Well, Laura Carlson, I hope we can continue having these conversations. They're incredibly important, and I feel like we covered a lot of really important ground, so I really, really appreciate it. Laura Carlson is the director of the Americas program at the Center for International Policy. Laura, thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. All right, folks, and yes, I could say with confidence that both on Majority Report and TMBS, more conversations with Laura Carlson, that it's really awesome when somebody can cover so much terrain, but then also, there's a lot of connections there that you can tease out. And I just thought she did that really well.
She's the Carlson you want to hear talking about Mexico.
That's true. I think it's spelled differently.
Yep, with an
but
E.
Yes, it's the good Carlson. There's the bad Carlson. We talk to the good
We don't like
Carlson.
that guy.
We don't like that guy because frankly, he's a bad guy. He's got a frozen food air brain, and we don't like it.
And he uptalks.
He uptalks, and we don't like it. I mean, look, that is the context. What is so incredible, before we even get into what these more complex conversations, and they're important conversations of borders and culture. And look, in the United States is a melting pot culture. Is a broad-based culture, even though it's also a white supremacist culture. But it's a good thing that it's a wide-based melting pot culture. That's a good thing. That's a strength of this country, undeniably. That's a liberal talking point. That's true. And there's also just another truth that most people, just take a way less serious, way less melodramatic example. We rightly note that, look, if somebody wants to, leave their town in the South or the Midwest or the industrial belt and go pursue a career in New York or Seattle or whatever, if they want to do that, great, salud, go for it. But you should not be forced to do that because your economic base of where you've grown up is so hollowed out that you don't even have an opportunity to pursue what you want to do there. Right? And vice versa. Obviously, so many people are priced out of places like New York. Now, not even just the working class and the poor, but a lot of people in the middle class, because these are oligarch and equality cities. But we know that, the long-winded way of saying, most people actually have an affinity for where they've grown up. So if you even had like the most, and I don't, I give no quarter on the concerns of people like Tucker Carlson because I think they're paranoid and bigoted and ludicrous. But it's like, you want less migration. I don't know why you would want less migration, but the only answers to that are setting up a situation where we're not terrorizing El Salvador or pushing the Merida initiative and people actually feel like, hey, yeah, I kind of generally might want to stay. I mean, I don't live in Massachusetts, but I like that I can go see my parents pretty easily. I think most people would like to not feel, they're not walking thousands of miles with small children to like life optimized. It's basic human survival. And we are the prime instigators of those problems in a geopolitical sense. That's just objective reality. So, any conversation, including also, the liberal perspective that doesn't start there is ludicrous because, sure, it's great. Look, it's better to speak out, obviously, against racism. But then on the other hand, I mean, you don't think it's a form of racism that we've muscled through, this obscene drug war in Mexico? Essentially, I like the way she put it. It is to create new markets. It is literally to create. Defense is a huge market. It's a growth industry, folks. Anyways, we'll get to the fun half. And actually, and this is going to, because I do think we need to start talking about, how do people vote on defense increases? How have people voted on the Trump budgets? And I think how people are framing their plans relative to our impact on the planet. You have to think on some level, if you're a voter in the United States, you're voting on behalf of literally everybody on the planet. And that is not true of somebody who's voting in Denmark. It's not true. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how the show happens. Check out justcoffee.coop. Fair trade, tea, coffee, or chocolate. Amazing, socially cooperative enterprise. Worker-owned enterprise. That's what we're talking about. Richard Wolff style enterprise in the great state of Wisconsin. On the Michael Brooks Show on Tuesday, we hosted Emma Vigeland, presented a mini illicit history of the different ideological strains of the Iranian Revolution. In the post-game, we had a huge amount of fun, as always, including the debunk with Ben Burgess. This Sunday, we're doing a deep primer on Iran. Next week, a primer and mini and illicit history of Hezbollah as well. Patreon.com/TMBS and Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. And tomorrow, people that aren't patrons can buy tickets to our Chicago live show, August 24th. Patrons have already gobbled up a bunch of them. We look forward to seeing you in Chicago.
Be my second straight fall in Chicago.
Well, August 24th is that
the late fall? That's the last time I was.
Your second Indian summer in Chicago.
I saw a Cubs game last time. I don't know if we'll do that again this time.
I saw a Cubs game when I was in Chicago. That's funny. Wrigley Field. Matt, literary hangover.
The Song of Hiawatha by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow is the most recent episode. Yesterday I had a really good day. I went to B-Dubs by myself to look over my note cards for recording the Margaret Fuller episode of the Literary Hangover, which we did last night. A fun quote from her is basically and this isn't coming out for another week, but I'm excited about it. She was the first female foreign correspondent for American newspaper.
Right.
Maybe any. Probably not any, I guess. Maybe some Brits got over in America. But she was over in Italy for the 1848 revolutions, and she wrote this dispatch on April 19th. My country, meaning America, is at present spoiled by prosperity, stupid with the lust of gain, soiled by crime in its willing perpetuation of slavery, shamed by an unjust war, meaning the Mexican-American War, which Hawthorne himself didn't think was that big of a deal. Noble sentiment much forgotten even by individuals. The aims of politicians selfish or petty. The literature frivolous and venal. To go back to the Hawthorne thing, he said, I don't think it's as much of a calamity as everybody else seems to think it is. Which is like, it's like the Mexican-American derangement syndrome, right? It's the conservative, like, I'm not going to say one way or the other on the actual thing being argued about. I'm just going to say the libs are overreacting a little bit. And it's fucking timeless. Sorry for swearing.
No, that's perfect. That's all right. They're only 2 F words. We have a ton of stuff to get to in the fun half. I just opened the IMs. Check out the Antifada on Patreon as well. I would actually also just want to say, in light of this episode, really do check out the Redirect, Ronald Reagan's podcast, Stephen Robbins on iTunes, and of course also on, and in fact, first and foremost on Patreon. Really important show for understanding this stuff. We'll see you in the fun half. Welcome to the fun half. Let's take a quick call out of the gate. You're calling from a 989 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael, this is JJ calling from Washington, D.C. How you doing?
Hey, JJ, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Not much. Just first of all, I wanted to say thanks for everything you guys do. I love the show. The conversation today was absolutely awesome.
Appreciate it.
Just off the bat, I wanted to say real quick that I'm really worried about Bolsonaro, or whoever it is, Bolsonaro.
Bolsonaro,
really
you can
about
say it.
Doing, no. I can say it, yeah. I'm really concerned about what he's doing with the humanities. I'm actually graduating tomorrow with my master's in philosophy and social policy.
Oh,
so
cool.
it really concerns me about, people should be studying these things. People should be learning about the humanities, history, philosophy, the arts. So, just worried about that. And I know you're going to probably talk about it later in the show here, but, just wanted to bring that up because I think it's so important as someone who's getting their degree in that as well. So, and then the fun thing I wanted to say is that, have you ever thought that the Dave Rubin impression you do sounds a little bit like Bullwinkle? And if that's the case, does that make Ben Shapiro Rocky?
I don't, I like the direction you're going in. I don't know these cartoons enough, though. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I buy it, though. I buy it. Is Bullwinkle stupid?
Okay, yeah. A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Rocky's usually the fast-talking smart one next to him, trying to guide him through things. So,
trying to make sure that he understands that he will not be going to his anniversary party.
Yeah, making a cake for him. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Well, that's
thanks
all
for the call.
say, but I really appreciate the show. Thanks, guys, for what you do.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Wait, what is that? What is
that? Was a bit of Rocky and Bullwinkle mixed with another version of La Poupée. I can't find just the scene with him and Rocky, though.
All right, let's take one more
old
call.
Cartoons, but...
You're calling from a 413 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi there. This is artist J. Andrew World from Western Mass.
Hey, J. Andrew. How you doing? What's on your mind? Thanks for calling.
Pretty good. Hey, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for today's episode. It was absolutely fantastic because this is going along with my graphic novel that I've been working on.
Oh, awesome. What is the graphic novel about?
Yeah, it's about ICE and immigration. I'm actually trying to tell, not like the news and facts, we kind of heard, but really kind of humanize everything.
Yeah.
Do it through humor, through mostly it's kind of I'm very inspired by classic EC horror comics. So there's a lot of really ambiguous, dark stuff that goes on with it.
Cool. Okay. Great. Look forward to looking at that.
I was actually planning on going to El Paso to actually see some of this stuff firsthand. And I've been having a crowdfunding campaign that's been going on.
Oh, great. Do you want to plug that?
Yeah. I got, if you go to my my Twitter on Right About Now too, I have 40 million links to it. I don't think I've done it today because I've been a little busy on other stuff, but I'll get that out real soon.
Great. Thanks for the call. Is there anything else you want to touch on before you go?
Yeah, just real quickly. I know this conservative who keeps posting links to Snopes that debunks everything that he says, because Snopes has the meme that he likes.
Oh, okay.
And would that be a self-cooking ice cream cone?
Yes, I buy it.
Okay.
Thank you for the call. I buy it. So in Brazil, it's been an interesting couple of weeks. There's a couple of things that have been happening. One, Lula has been doing interviews, and in addition to restating the fully political nature of this case, it's demented. Hassan Madri, who I think has a show on Netflix, did a segment recently. I haven't watched it yet, but it was shown to me. Basically, he going rightly to attack Bolsonaro's plans to destroy the Amazon, which is a threat to every human being on the planet. Again, he just uncritically repeated that Dilma was removed for financial crime, serious financial allegations, even though that even at this point, sort of even mainstream media sort of admits that her impeachment was completely baseless, and just repeating. I mean, if you read any piece in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Guardian, they'll say Lula's at the BBC, Lula's in jail for corruption. At the very least, a fair, legitimate report would say disputed charges orchestrated by a prosecutor who now serves as justice minister in the current government. He's been doing interviews. He's been actually articulating very well the failure, the catastrophe of Bolsonaro's first couple of months in office. Now there's an investigation into Bolsonaro's son emerging about with actual real charges, with material evidence having to do with potential money laundering charges for millions of dollars. Bill de Blasio rejected basically Bolsonaro coming to New York City. He's been in Texas where he was greeted with protests. And now in just just a hugely, the type of thing that not only is hugely significant, but we need to learn from in the age of Trump and the age of all of these horrifying bills targeting women being passed in places like Alabama. People have taken to the streets to protest the Bolsonaro regime, Bolsonaro government's war on education. This is a continuity of the austerity that started as soon as Dilma was removed from office. But this is also specifically trying to get rid of sociology and philosophy departments. So there's a huge ideological component of this. We have video here. Brian Mayer of Brazil Wire and Telesur should definitely be following Brazil Wire and Brian Mayer to understand all things that are happening in Brazil. Look at this mass amount of people on the streets in Brazil. Incredible result. And as of this video, he said, I think it was 200,000. Now estimates are that there are up to 1 million people striking to defend education. I'm going to quote a little bit from a piece on Ion Latin America by Fiona Edwards, who's also a good journalist on this stuff, based in the UK. The National Confederation of Workers in Education described the day of education strikes as a quote-unquote warm-up for further mobilizations against this and other aspects of Bolsonaro's austerity offensive that threaten to impoverish the Brazilian people and undermine Brazil's national economic and social development. The next big anti-austerity mobilization is planned for June 14th, 2019, with workers preparing for a central strike against Bolsonaro's proposed attacks on pensions, which is currently being debated in Congress. Bolsonaro's project is to dismantle higher education by starving universities of state funding as a first step towards opening the door for full privatization of the education sector. Now, this is so crucial because, of course, rightly, we put a lot of attention here on his homophobia, his misogyny, his racism, which are massive and relentlessly documented. His literal neo-fascist background. He was a captain in the Brazilian military junta that the term neo-fascism was coined to describe. But these attempts to gut pensions, to destroy labor unions, to privatize public education, these are the reasons that the Wall Street Journal endorsed a full-on fascist candidate for the presidency of the largest country in Latin America. This is the ideological impetus for the war against the social movements in Brazil, the war against Lula and Dilma and the Workers' Party, and the way the Western and Anglo press has worked hand in glove with U.S. foreign policy and U.S. corporate interests to put this catastrophe in office. Remember Ian Bremmer? Ian Bremmer is one of these, these horrific mediocrity Davos soothsayers in the Fareed Zakaria, Thomas Friedman mold, sort of. And there was a great piece on him in the Baffler. I forget who wrote it, but it came out a couple of weeks ago. Everybody should read it. And he runs a risk consultancy called Eurasia Group. And, his job is to advise banks and advise corporations and then, pontificate on CNN about how somehow we can get back to, because all of his arguments always lead back to, well, there's this huge rise in right-wing populism. And first of all, let's make a false equivalency. Let's do what John Oliver did. And, I don't know if Ian Bremmer's done this, but I would be shocked if he didn't, do something as ludicrous as comparing Trump and AMLO. And let's just get back to stability. And stability always somehow means opening countries up for foreign direct investment, austerity, and then a form of kind of basic social moderation. But of course, actual things, are potentially negotiable. If you look at another figure like this, Tony Blair or Hillary Clinton, they're quite willing to negotiate on refugee rights, as an example. So he wrote a piece in Time magazine where he called Bolsonaro was his nominee for Person of the Year. And in perfect symmetry, he literally he said he had toxic masculinity, which, like, if ever there was your signal to maybe consider retiring that phrase, it would be Ian Bremmer deploying it in the context of giving himself plausible deniability because he knows how disgusting Bolsonaro is, and he knows that things like Bolsonaro saying he'd prefer to have a kid die than be gay, and that there's potential links between Bolsonaro's family and the gang that assassinated Marielle Franco, which I'm sure Bremer doesn't even think about. But he said he also might be the person to finally reform Brazil's economy. And what does that mean? Because when Michel Temer came to power after the totally illegitimate process, the judicial congressional coup that removed Dilma Rousseff from office, he immediately started gutting the achievements that Lula and the Workers' Party had put in place. And what that meant was that Brazil, which had been taken off of the UN hunger list, went back on it. And as Lula said last week, he said, look, there's a bunch of people in this country's elite want this country to work for about 36 million people, which might be generous. And he said the rest are just a statistic. They don't matter to them. It doesn't matter if they starve to death. It doesn't matter if their bodies are misshapen. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that a young person like Lula, who grew up in extreme poverty and worked his way as a metal worker and lost a finger doing it, they don't care. And Ian Bremmer doesn't care. Ian Bremmer is there to do kind of intellectual shell casing around the ruthless march of neoliberalism, which is willing to negotiate with fascists like Bolsonaro. Brendan, what were you going to say?
Oh, just that Ian Bremmer also just this morning said that he would rather vote for Howard Schultz for president than Bill de Blasio.
Well,
he's really on a hot streak.
Yes. I mean, Ian Bremmer is very bad, not good.
He's a charlatan.
He's a charlatan, folks, and not bright. And Bill de Blasio, look, he's running for president. That's a joke. The idea that you would, contribute $1 to him and not to a fund to fight to protect abortion in southern states is obscene. And, I don't know whether he's just delusional and wants a vacation or whether there's something more cynical about, a new way to wring out bucks from the real estate industry. In the last couple of years, he's mayor and get some consulting contracts going. But credit where credit is due. He told Bolsonaro to basically that he was, garbage and not come to NYC. So Bolsonaro went to Texas, and this is where I want to do a trigger warning. This is going to be one of the most horrifying, disgusting, stomach-churning pictures you will see ever. That's right. Jair Bolsonaro and Ted Cruz. That's Heidi Cruz. I think that's Jair Bolsonaro's wife, but I'm not sure.
She looks like Callista Gingrich.
Yes, she does. Sorry. Sorry if you're eating. This is evil, folks. It doesn't get more evil than this picture, folks.
Yeah, psychopathy doesn't get more glamorous than this.
Actually, it really does. But, again, I want to reemphasize, this is the depths of humanity, but the heights of humanity are that the Brazilians are out there striking. The landless workers movement is still going. Lula is roasting this guy from prison. Totally undaunted after being a political prisoner for a year. So we should have solidarity and we should learn. And we should also, as we measure our choices for president, be thinking extremely attentively about our global footprint. And that's why I do want to, we'll have one segment later where we'll give, Elizabeth Warren some credit, but I really did have a problem with this tweet. And it's part of a larger, because, as is Warren's strategy, this isn't just a tweet. She put out a Medium post where she's framing the climate crisis in terms of Pentagon strategy. And she's definitely noting that, look, the Pentagon's reliance on fossil fuel does make Pentagon operations more dangerous. in terms of transportation of fuel, in terms of refueling, in terms of emergency response. So she said, today I'm introducing my Defense Climate Resiliency and Readiness Act to harden the U.S. military against the threat posed by climate change and to leverage its huge energy footprint as part of our climate solution. Senior military leaders have warned Congress of the national security challenge that the climate change poses. The military is taking steps to become more energy efficient and resilient, but instead of meeting this threat head on, Washington is ignoring it and making it worse. I think there's one more tweet. Is there one more tweet above? Yeah, so this climate, it's real, and it's worsening. This is her first tweet, and it's undermining our military readiness. More and more is accomplishing the mission depends on our ability to continue operation in the face of flood, drought, wildfires, desertification. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce that word. And right now, an extreme cold. So here's my problem. One, it's objectively true that the Pentagon as a DC bureaucracy is both massively and definitionally wasteful and harmful to the planet, right? Operating a global a global empire of any sort leaves a huge ecological footprint. Then there's also the ecological footprint of, munitions being exploded across the world. The ecological footprint of everything from drone warfare in Somalia, Pakistan, Yemen, ongoing military conflict and refueling in Afghanistan. Look at what we have done to the ecology of Pakistan. Rafia Zakaria writes about this. Down to the fact that a place like Vieques in Puerto Rico under ongoing colonial occupation is still recovering from being used as a U.S. military test tube. So I do have a moral objection to this, and I think there is a central contradiction between a serious climate strategy and the frame of hardening U.S. military capacity. Now, conversely, the U.S. military has been well ahead of other branches of government in moving forward on efficiency and recognizing the threat that climate change poses. The Pentagon, going back to the Bush administration, would have Pentagon reports where they would note the security challenges of climate, even as you had, in practice, a full-on climate-denying administration. And that's why people like Thomas Friedman, when they were doing their muscular, green, but not green, let's call it geostrategic, capitalist, patriotic, were always talking about the Pentagon as the sort of vehicle. Now, the third component is there's no doubt that the Pentagon has always been a massive source of R&D. That's where the government spends. We starve other sectors, but we spend a huge amount on the military. And that money goes to state funding of the Pentagon. It goes to huge systems of contractors, and there's a massive amount of double dealing and corruption there. And sometimes those innovations, as we know, filter out into society. The internet, right? Pretty big stuff. But I think we're going to need to question whether we want that relationship to continue. Now, in conjunction with this, Elizabeth Warren is also proposing some very good stuff on dealing with the corruption issues in the military, appropriations process. And she's, of course, rightly calling out Trump's new defense secretary, Shaheen, is a defense contractor. The classic double-dealing swamp corruption of Washington, which, again, this is the stuff where the Trump administration looks very similar to the Reagan administration, the Clinton administration, and so on. But this is also in light of the fact that with regards to Warren's record, there is a disturbing consistency of a gap between her global view and her domestic view. And also, as she frames these issues, they actually matter. I want Bernie to go further, but Bernie says we need to take on the military-industrial complex. I saw him say that in Brooklyn. Bernie has opposed intervention in Venezuela. Warren has not. Bernie was willing to criticize modestly Israel, while Warren was defending even the 2014 onslaught and mass killing in Gaza, where a UN school was shelled, behavior that was so atrocious and abominable that even Joe Scarborough criticized it. And I want to point out, and we're shrinking here. If we go back for the whole career, I'm sure Sanders has voted and protected military programs and defense allocations I would disagree with, and conflicts that maybe in retrospect were wrong, like the bombing of Serbia. That's fine. We criticize it, have an honest conversation. I think the comments that Sanders made about drones in 2016 were wrong. Pretty goddamn dreary, in fact. Again, none of them, including Tulsi Gabbard, have said anything clear and strong about a radical change in drone warfare. And I have to say, on the basis of who has the best advisors and people who think most seriously about this, it's definitely Sanders who would theoretically get us the closest there. But he hasn't said it yet. But he has been the one who's talked about cutting U.S. military spending. And most importantly, in the Trump era, he's been the only one who's done it. And we should have put this on screen, but I have it. I mean, this is a basic graph. This is in the Trump era. In 2017, in fact, the Senate passed a military spending allocation that was larger than what Trump asked for, presided over by John McCain, who was still head of the Armed Services Committee. Warren voted for that. In fact, here's the 2017 budget, $218 billion for military spending. Sanders voted no in 2017. 2018, $695 billion. Sanders voted no. 2019, $717 billion. Sanders voted no. So Sanders has voted against all three Trump military budgets. Now, let's go. I think it will be of a surprise to no one that Gillibrand has voted for one of these budgets, that Harris has voted for these budgets, that Klobuchar has voted for all three of these budgets, that Beto O'Rourke has voted for all three of these budgets, that Cory Booker has voted for all three of these budgets. But I want to point out, too, that might surprise people. So let's start with Tulsi Gabbard, who, again, I've been giving her a lot of credit. Great position, being clear and firm against intervention and U.S. coup-mongering in Venezuela. Well, Tulsi Gabbard voted the right way in 2017 and 2018. She voted no on both of those. She voted yes in 2019 on a $717 million budget. These figures do come from Veterans for Sanders, but these are source is GovTrack US. Now, Elizabeth Warren did the opposite path. She voted no on 2019, $717 billion, but she voted yes in 2018 on $695 billion, and she voted yes in 2017 on $218 billion. And I really fear that this frame, along, of course, with her inability to say anything about Latin America, her, to put it generously, total lack of clarity on Venezuela, her very late in the game sort of move to even slightly moderately criticize Israel, as well as when we also put in the fact that Bernie Sanders was the only member of the entire Democratic caucus to vote against new sanctions against Iran. Now, to Warren's credit, again, she's co-sponsoring the Udall bill that's being put forward to stop the Trump administration, Pompeo-Bolton march to war with Iran. But these are seriously uneven things in her record, and they're serious problems. And to me, you can't look at a U.S. global footprint as an afterthought. You can think about this stuff. You have the luxury in the United States of thinking about what we do, in Honduras, not at all. You have less of a luxury about Iran. But in any scenario, you are impacting people. And it's clear to me that there's only one candidate who is far from perfect on these issues, but has even the beginnings of a sketch, as well as the advisors who at least are taking seriously the relentless impact, the lives, the cost of a U.S. global footprint like this. And so it's not okay with me to go for the sort of superficially appealing tactic of enlisting this machine in a climate argument when the overall impact of this machine is both, again, fundamentally incompatible with dealing with the climate crisis in terms of the raw amount of uses that resources that even a more efficient Pentagon would use, as well as the human global footprint of what the U.S. military actually does, whether we're talking about Afghanistan or Puerto Rico. And again, Elizabeth Warren, obviously great on many areas of domestic policy, definitely my second choice. But the idea that we're going to have this whole conversation that I think, by the way, is already, especially this early in the game, the wonkery does not matter as much as people want it to matter. But if you're not going to include in that a global analysis of how we are actually functioning in the world, you have a radically narcissistic U.S.-centric view, which I fundamentally object to. And this reifying of U.S. empire in service of even a noble end is fundamentally undermining of the actual confrontation that we are going to need to have, both for planetary survival, but also for a far more humane and just order. Because, you can't be closing down tax shelters while still presiding over global fleets in every continent and killing, civilians in unregistered drone wars. So that's a problem. Colin from Nebraska. Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts, quasi-owner of the Chicago Cubs and son of racist anti-union TD Ameritrade founder Joe Ricketts, tweeted yesterday saying that Nebraska is a pro-life state, and was proud that Alabama and Georgia legislatures were brave to champion their draconian anti-abortion bills. Fuck Pete Ricketts. I would welcome people to come to Omaha's Maha Festival in August for a female-dominated lineup to chant fuck Pete Ricketts repeatedly as we have done last year. Yes, fuck Pete Ricketts. And fuck all of these legislators. It's obscene and dangerous. I don't want to dwell too much on this, but there's a lot of headlines, and there's always the impulse to, I don't even know what it is. Maybe it's just as simple as it's a counterintuitive take that will create clickbait. But the Washington Post says, televangelist Pat Robertson claims Alabama abortion bill is extreme and has gone too far. Now, what does that make you think when you guys read that headline? What's your first thought?
It's too crazy even for these crazy conservatives. Wow, they've really gone too far this time. Even Pat Robertson is terrified that a 12-year-old rape victim might be forced to keep the baby or face criminal charges. Even Pat Robertson gets that, right? Matt, what did you take from that headline? Same sort of reaction? Do you guys want to go to the tape? I feel like Jon Stewart here. We do have tape of what he actually said. Or, in fact, if you read the body of the text, we go to what he's actually saying.
I think Alabama has gone too far. They've passed a law that would give a 99-year prison sentence to people who commit abortion. There's no exception for rape or incest. It's an extreme law, and they want to challenge Roe versus Wade. But my humble view is that this is not the case we want to bring to the Supreme Court, because I think this one will lose.
So that's a strategic argument. He might be right on the strategy, but this is not a moral objection to a fundamental assault on women's sovereignty. And I really think in a time where you're talking about putting doctors for performing a procedure in jail for 99 years, and you are absolutely terrorizing women in these states and across the country, it's just not the time for the dumb counterintuitive clickbait. What's this Ben Shapiro?
He doesn't have the strategic concerns that Pat Robertson has.
Wait, really? The guy from the intellectual dark web, the New York Times cool kid philosopher, that really smart guy because he uses Jerusalem and Athens in his book? No.
If you believe that a human life is a human life in the womb, the fact that a grave wrong was done to initiate the creation of that life does not mean that the life itself is of no value. There's a logical distinction between the evil that was done to create the life in the first place and the presence of the life now that the life is present. That's why I've always been in favor of an exception in case of serious danger to the mother, and that would include mental health. If a woman is going to go crazy and harm herself, for example, if a woman is going to be so depressed that she becomes suicidal, then abortion, in my view, becomes an option because now the mother's life is in danger.
Well, he's trying to create a backdoor out for himself, right?
And not
there.
like that leads to any weird, awful incentives.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's an even more. That's a whole other totally disturbing,
like
draconian,
the catch-22 for abortion.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and again, I mean, ultimately, I don't know. I just think it's these things are settled legally, and I know that Roe is written in a way. Because, sorry to go all postmodernist here, but law is constructed. Law is a political project. It is not a natural thing that has descended from the sky. But we have made a basic political, moral judgment that women's capacity to control their own bodies, their own sovereignty, their own life trajectory is going to supersede the potential of life, which I think really, the potential of a human life. And again, there's no, we're also in a time here where the president and Fox News is literally going out across the country lying, saying that people are actually suggesting that fully born babies can be killed. So
Ben Shapiro's suggesting that too. Here's a bit more.
Danger, and you stake her life against the life of the human life in her womb. Alabama, I think, by the way, does the right thing. From a pro-life perspective when it comes to rape and incest, concessions with regard to rape and incest have always been sort of a sop to public opinion rather than a principled stand about the value of human life. They also open the door to the argument, okay, well, if you are saying that a human life is not a human life if you don't want it to be a human life, then why wouldn't you extend that to cases other than rape and incest? It's also worthwhile noting that the left tends to point out arguments about rape and incest because those are the most emotionally resonant cases in which people who are generally pro-life would say, well, maybe an abortion should be on the table.
Yeah, I think it is pretty emotionally resonant that a 12-year-old girl in Ohio might be forced to keep her rapist child in a way that might totally physically overwhelm her body because men have voted to control her sovereignty. I think that is actually pretty emotionally relevant to sentient human beings, even very flawed human beings. If you have the most basic capacity to think outside whatever sort of bizarre religious, isolated, empathy-free fanaticism that Ben Shapiro is living in.
It's like he needs a guidebook. Like, here's the psychopath's guide to what is emotionally resonant.
Right. And again, look, Ben Burgess will be releasing a tape in a few days where he sort of explains the logical fallacy of asserting, basically a continuum fallacy, right? Like, because frankly, and I'm sorry to get kind of gross here, but if you want to go on a continuum fallacy and if you want to follow the logic of what Ben Shapiro is saying, masturbating should be illegal. Right? Like that literally is you're getting rid of and I don't want to be gross here, but you're disposing of something that if it meets another thing can create a person. So you could even call that discarding human life.
It's human biology.
It is literally human biology. So what we do in a sane world is we make a distinction, right? Like, and again, I don't think that this is, I do think that this argument is actually one that does need to kind of be foundationally built on different politics and different value sets. But like the way he is able to do, by the way, and then articulate to his young fans such an incredibly totalitarian, horrifying policy as the one in Alabama. But because, you walk by a tree on the street in Brooklyn does not mean you're in a forest, right? Like if you want to just talk on like a continuum fallacy, if you think that an embryo is the same as a delivered baby, you're not able to make basic distinctions in your mind. So he's using, a fast voice and quote unquote logic to draw an insane equivalency and collapse basic distinctions that any person using an empirical sort of guide stick would make. And it is also great. I think Hassan Piker made this point on Twitter, like, that this is sort of like the end. If you see the IDW's roots in atheist YouTube, it goes from, complaining about evangelicals and certainly, of course, having endless tantrums about Muslims to, having a guy. I'm sure Sam Harris, I'm sure he probably opposes the Alabama bill, but he'd be willing to have a, calm, dreary conversation about Ben Shapiro. But one of the leading lights of supposedly all of this sort of logic lord stuff supports the most totalitarian bill imaginable. And, I'll just say, I think these points are generally stupid one way or another, but Iran, abortion totally publicly available. I thought you had something. My friend, the great Anna Kasparian, who does great work on TYT, but also really good work on her show Unfiltered. I really appreciate that she did this because, look, first of all, it gives us an opportunity to make fun of Meghan McCain. And Meghan McCain is trash, and Meghan McCain is the walking embodiment of the need to eliminate all inherited wealth. Maybe if Meghan McCain had to do like an honest day's labor and didn't have like the easiest life imaginable handed to her because of her father, maybe she might be a halfway decent paid up member of the human race. We don't even know what Meghan McCain could have been if she wasn't the ultimate trust fund baby case. I always thought that Meghan McCain's kind of shtick was basically like, I want to be given money. I want to be handed a huge inheritance. My dad. And of course, because of my dad, I'm sure, of course, I support Israel no matter what it does. I think the United States should go and bomb other people as much as possible, particularly in the Middle East. But hey, I have gay friends. And, And I remember when John McCain was running for president, there was one time, I think in 2000, when he was doing his Maverick run, he got in trouble because someone asked him, he was pro-life, but someone said, hey, if your daughter got pregnant, what would you do? And I believe he actually said we'd have to talk about it and she'd have to think about it, which was, he might have even said it was her choice, which is a hugely controversial thing at the time. So I thought Meghan McCain's whole shtick was, lie about Ilhan Omar, throw tantrums, mention her dad, but kind of do the spoiled millennial equivalent of, I'm a fiscal conservative and a social liberal. But this clip, actually, I guess, according to what Anna's saying, that is actually what her position is. But she's going out telling the public something very different.
Got to make hay.
Far out. Let's check this out.
Following the state of Georgia passing the fetal heartbeat bill into law, of course, the conversation about that legislation and now law was had on The View. And what's interesting is how Meghan McCain supposedly supports the legislation in this next video and how she supposedly supports scientific evidence for the legislation. Take a look.
Honestly, I think what we need to do on this conversation is I'd like to see much more doctors and medical experts involved. Yeah. Get it out of politics. By the way, overwhelmingly shows.
I'm sorry. It is politics. I'm confident if you polled most doctors, I'm assuming most of them would in fact be pro-choice and pro-woman sovereignty, but it doesn't matter. You can find doctors who were so committed to providing the service that they were assassinated after Bill O'Reilly called them killers every night on national television. And I'm sure you can find doctors who, like Ben Shapiro's wife, probably is pro-life. It doesn't matter. It ultimately is, in fact, a political decision. And the political decision is that women have this choice and this capacity to govern themselves, period.
Way overwhelmingly shows that life does start at conception. The science backs it, and liberals always want to believe science when it comes to climate change and things like that. When it comes to life,
that is your belief. That is your belief.
You don't believe science. The science.
So
that
let me
backs
ask
it
you
up
something.
as
Here's
well.
what I don't want to do. Don't say you don't believe. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't believe that the minute you conceive, you are with child. What I don't want is I don't want anyone telling me what I have to feel and believe. That's my problem.
A nuance there when you're talking about being
again,
pro-life.
I understand
We'll
it can be.
Sorry. We'll be back.
Later, you mad?
We have to include that last part, that toss to the brain. You mad? Anyway.
Was it about Meghan?
Probably. I mean, the eye rolls are nonstop. But I have a quick message for Meghan. Look, I just wish that you were honest about your real views on abortion, because her public statements about abortion are very different from her private statements about abortion. So I'm just putting that out there because I think it's important for you to be honest, because women's lives and livelihood is really, being jeopardized here by you trying to win political brownie points by conservatives by saying things that you don't actually believe. So I'm just putting that out there.
Wow.
Secondly, I know, shots fired, but I think it's important
I didn't know
to
that.
call out people's dishonesty.
So that happened.
So Anna basically was saying, like, because she did know Meghan McCain. I think they worked on a TV project. I think they were hired at the same place. Not like they didn't work to collaborate together, but they were hired part of the same project together. And so she's basically saying, like, yeah, I've had private conversations with you where pretty different than your public shtick, which does not surprise me at all. John McCain's ghost. Maybe the biggest downside of being dead right now is that no matter how hard I try, I always end up going through the back walls. Now on the subject of my daughter, Meghan, it's time for some straight talk. You can do better. Okay. All right. No, I can't. I can't finish that one. Brock from VA, right after Kavanaugh leading up in the midterms, the big mobilizer was a blue wave in stopping Trump and the Republicans. Do you think that just saying Biden was against the blue wave is a good, simple bumper sticker way of showing less informed Democrats that say that was just a way to beat Trump, that Biden is not on your side and working against their interests? I mean, not that bumper sticker, but I do think you could make some hay of that. Yes, I do. I definitely think the fact that he went and did that speech praising Fred Upton, in addition to all of the just unbelievably delusional things that Biden is saying about Republicans, can do something. And also, I think this, let's play this sound. I want to be really careful in terms of how we talk about policy on the show, because again, I think voters do care about policy, and they increasingly care about policy. And if we just say they don't care about the substance, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, and there's a lot of debates and nuance within it, because on the same time, of course, a lot of people are voting on instinct and all these other things. And I also think, as an example, again, I think Bernie Sanders amassing an actual movement is far more significant than crossing dotting every I, right? And there is like some argument there. But at the same time, of course it matters that Joe Biden is saying absolutely nothing of substance, and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are putting forth extremely important plans, starting with the foundation of things like single payer, to change your life in a fundamentally positive way. Not only is Joe Biden not doing that, not only is Joe Biden signaling that in addition to helping keep a seat red in 2018, that he wants to work with Republicans. And when you hear this rhetoric, remember that this is the guy who worked inside the Obama administration to cut a deal to savage Medicare and Social Security. And that should worry you if you're a even very moderate, let's beat Trump-oriented Democrat, because that is both a political loser and a real life loser if this guy gets in office.
Folks, the fact of the matter is, why in God's name say she paying a lower tax rate than firefighters, police officers, teachers? It makes no sense. Everybody's got to do their part. I'm not talking about soaking the wealthy. I'm talking about everybody paying their fair share.
The wealthy have been soaking everyone else since at least the 70s, like at least this cycle, or accelerating in the 80s. Or if you go back to the research out of Princeton, I think it goes back at least maybe even to the 60s of like no major policy battle that has ever been lost by the wealthy in this country. So in a time of such unbelievable inequality and all of the uncertainty and all of the crises that have come out of it, Joe Biden is going back to 2010 stuff. Because don't ever forget that the corollary of the tiny tax increases, I mean, you're talking about embarrassing tax increases that people like Obama and Biden, I mean, Obama and Biden there was one big argument about a private plane surcharge. Middling nonsense that is not going to pay for single payer health care or free college or an aggressive plan to save the planet. Because I get, easy for Biden. He doesn't support any of those three things. He has no serious plan for anything. But you both have the actual human need. Over 50% of people in this country cannot get together a couple $100 in an emergency. And this motherfucker is talking about paying a fair share and not soaking everybody when people are suffering and dying on a daily basis. Even in a so-called good economy, where people are working these horrific temp jobs. By the way, the same guy who has no sympathy for millennials. Millennials entering the worst economy in decades. Millennials getting their start after college, people like me, totally unemployed in 2018, 2009, 2008, 2009, 2007. A Wall Street meltdown, all of the major precursors of which Joe Biden voted for, including repealing Glass-Steagall. And he supported every single trade agreement that has gutted the industrial base of this country and written global rules that favor pharmaceutical, oil companies, and financial firms. And he's coming with this, let's tick up the box on the marginal rate a little bit. I mean, it's like, and this will not solve the crisis. You put this in office for 4 years. You think that's going to get reelected? You think that's going to beat back a global surge in far-right populism that already has brought us Trump, Modi, Bolsonaro, Orban? Are you kidding me? It's obscene. It's obscene and it's delusional. And of course, Joe Biden is headed to New York. Joe Biden plans his first New York fundraising blitz as a 2020 candidate for president. The fundraiser will supposedly be hosted by Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo came into office 2010, 2011 in the just massive aftermath of the Wall Street meltdown. So many people losing jobs and houses. He cut taxes for rich people in this state. He cut services. He's been in a war with labor unions. He's savaged poor people and has done everything that any industry wants in this state the whole time he's been here, and then has been slow moving as hell on headline grabbing things like marijuana legalization, which Joe Biden, I believe, still absolutely opposes. Joe Biden, ardent drug warrior, ardent prison industrial complex expander. Some of Biden's most ardent supporters are based in New York, according from CNBC, including hedge fund manager Jim Chanos, founder and president of the Kynikos Associates. The famed short seller who will be attending one of the events, according to the source, has been a growing guest list. Political fundraisers are sometimes known as bundlers and have been critical components in helping candidates raise millions of dollars behind the scenes. A Biden spokesperson declined to comment. New York is considered a hotspot for campaign fundraising. During the 2016 presidential campaign cycle, donors throughout the state combined to give more than $617 million to political causes. Biden's trip to New York comes after a successful swing through Hollywood, where he raised more than $700,000 at an event with a host committee that included Hollywood luminaries such as DreamWorks co-founder Jeffrey Katzenberg, executive and producer Peter Chernin, actor Rob Reiner, and Terry Press, president of CBS Films. Biden has been leading the way in the overall fundraising game. He beat out all 2010 contenders in their first day hauls, raking in $6.3 million and finished just ahead of Beto O'Rourke and Senator Bernie Sanders. So, Hillary Clinton, except more conciliatory to Republicans, with a worse record because he was in politics far longer to do far more bad things, from school segregation to NAFTA to Iraq to Anita Hill.
And you don't even get the victory for representation.
Including, by the way, I'm going to keep saying this. You want to talk on that level. The first non-Christian president of the United States is not nothing. Jesus Christ. Let's play this. This is funny. Just a little palate cleanser. Means TV, Worker Cooperative, Jake Flores. Who are the other people in this video? Melissa Rocca, and Anders Lee. This is a great because, you watch Vice, and Vice, like, I've seen a lot of, and, Vice does some good work, but they also do a lot of, like, not good work. And
unbalanced, not good.
And so, but you'll notice, like, Vice will do like like a documentary on the drug war.
I mean,
right?
Decent people have worked for Vice,
of course,
myself included.
Yeah. Buddy Anthony LaPay. But they'll start with like, we're in Guadalajara with the Sinaloa cartel, and they'll get some amazing footage. And, some of it will be just kind of like anthropologically fascinating. And then the segment ends with like, let's go talk to the Western Hemispheric Affairs head of the DEA, where they go and reinforce basically all of the presuppositions of U.S. foreign policy about said topic. So this is a funny bit of the intersection of Vice, the types of people that you might run into, the children of the Venezuelan elite that you would probably run into, who might have like, I don't know, they might do something like, I don't know, say as an example, just, I don't know, they might be like a YouTube comic.
Where they rant about things?
Yeah, where they like do like funny, quirky rants. And then as an example, maybe a really prestigious outlet like the New York Times would, for some very inexplicable reason, would give a YouTube comic a video platform to attack people opposing intervention in Venezuela, and then not disclose that the YouTube comic's father is a prime advisor to the U.S.-backed opposition. Something like that might happen. But this is the Vice version of that. Means TV with Jake Flores, Melissa Rocca, and Anders Lee. It's pretty funny. Check it out.
What's up, Vice International? This is Branch Rockefeller. I'm coming to you today from beautiful Bushwick, Brooklyn, New York. Today I'm going to be talking to two Venezuelan refugees/artists. We're going to be discussing how to bring democracy back to that authoritarian country.
Hey, Branchy.
What's up, Connor? So fucking pumped to be in your casa, dude. This is like sick. Oh, am I interrupting a little artistic descent here?
I'm just finishing up a blog post. It's about my favorite coffee shops in Brooklyn.
Oh, and you do it by hand?
I've always done it this way.
Well, for sure, and I bet like as a Venezuelan, like from what I've heard, computers are illegal in Venezuela.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, well, again, muchas gracias for answering my preguntas. Why don't we start with when it was that you ended up having to flee Venezuela?
There was a slave worker uprising on my dad's plantation, and I just had to get out of there. We all did.
Technically, I was born on my father's yacht as we were leaving Venezuela. Legally speaking, I am recognized by some countries as a pirate. And now we live in my parents' building here in Brooklyn.
I'm so sorry for your hardship. Like, I apologize. Why do you support internationally recognized President of Venezuela, Juan Guaido?
He's best friends with my dad, and I've known him since I was a little kid. He's always been around. He's so funny. I actually think he's my godfather.
I'm just tired of seeing so much discrimination in Venezuela against POWs.
Prisoners of war?
No, people of wealth.
All right, so I got to ask you the bro question, because, you know, let's be honest, like, it's literally only white male bros are asking this question, but, like, given the history of U.S. imperialism, like economic exploitation, military expansionism in the global South, like, whatever you think of Maduro, why should the U.S. intervene?
The U.S. needs to get involved in Venezuela because sometimes hands off means blood on your hands.
That's so good, man. That's great. You're calling from a 614 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hello. Is this me?
Yep.
Hey, cool. I'm so glad I got a Michael Thursday because Sam's very unfair to nervous callers. It's Kirk from Brisbane, Australia.
Hey, Kirk, what's on your mind?
So, firstly, we just recently had a former Prime Minister named Bob Hawke die a few hours ago, and he was a Labor leader, and he introduced a lot of sweeping social reforms. So, you know, props to Bob Hawke.
Props to Bob Hawke.
Anyway, Bob Hawke, yes. Hawk with an E. So I had a kind of a broad but brief question about the political situation in Australia, which, a few years ago, I think nobody wanted to admit that, Trump, that a new America was going to influence the rhetoric and political outcomes in Australia, but it really has. And I think it's changed the landscape a lot over here. So just generally, broadly speaking, there's this kind of very Fox Newsy, IDW influenced rhetoric popping up all over Australian, both coming from politicians and in the media, which is obviously heavily Murdoch influenced in Australia. So my question is, having sort of suffered a pretty terrible failure on the left, specifically Trump and emboldened Republican base, and then some inspiring victories in the midterms, do you have any advice for sort of combating these cashed up, dishonest right-wing groups and the broader political project that you think would resonate with the public in a better way than what happened for you guys back in 2016?
Well, I can't, I know that obviously some of these things are very specific to the dynamics of a place. So I've never even been to Australia, so I need to learn a lot more about Australia. But, it seems to me that, like, there's always the sort of like, there's two steps, right? I mean, one step I do think that's really important, and I think was one of the catastrophes of 2016 and the Trump-Clinton dynamic was, part of this is an outgrowth of the center-left, centrist parties totally failing over decades in terms of confronting the collapse economically of most, of a huge swaths of these populations. So I don't know as much about Australia. I do know, though, that in some ways Australia's Labour Party was a pioneer of third way politics. Even, the Labour Party in Britain under Blair and Clinton, they looked to Blair and Brown looked to Bill Clinton, but they actually also looked to Australia. So one part I do think that there is a dimension that has to deal with the serious economics, material conditions of people and dealing with it on those terms. Then I think you have to argue and defeat bigots. And I think part of the way you argue and defeat bigots, and what I'm working on in my book, is in addition to rightly calling these things what they are, you have to remind people that actually being global and being part of a mass culture is both more historically accurate, because that's how the world actually works. There are no isolated separate cultures from each other, these giant feedback loops that inform and reinforce each other, and that's the nature of the world, and that's potentially an incredibly liberatory and good thing. And that, secondly, it's just boring. I mean, it's just, at the end of the day, particularly when you talk to I think some of the young men that get drawn to these IDW type characters, it's what is everything you like in sports, in pop culture, right? It is all a product of cosmopolitanism, of globalism, of people doing things together and synthesizing across boundaries. And that's what these people in all of these continuums want to eliminate, which is both immoral, but it's also incredibly boring and stupid. So, but I have to look more into it. Also, check out what Angela Foucault. She's running for local office. She's a TMBS person. She has a good YouTube channel, really good YouTube channel.
Yeah, man.
And so
I just looked into their party. They're
the Progressive Party.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we did a conversation about that on TMBS because we always like to encourage, when people in these communities are doing cool things, like run for office. But so that's another thing to check out. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Speaking of cool local political initiatives, Nigel Farage, who was one of the architects of Brexit, one of these, Bannon Fox News characters, far-right, xenophobe, fake populist type. He's no longer at UKIP. I guess now he's in the Brexit Party is the new thing.
Yeah, he Sargon and those types have taken over UKIP, and now Farage, for some reason I haven't sussed out, started his own new party, which is
probably
actually
different funding opportunities or something. Who knows?
It's polling better than UKIP apparently too.
More effective communicator than Sargon.
Apparently Sargon's not much of a political talent.
Make jokes to deal with the terror of life. All right, this is a funny new initiative in the UK. This is trigger warning. This isn't us saying it, but this is the F off Farage campaign.
Farage is back.
Why? He's formed a party, the Brexit Party.
To fight European elections and make sure that his precious Brexit can't be stopped.
Not only that, but he's leading the race, just like he did in the last European elections.
I am bored of seeing his face.
I'm bored of hearing his lies.
And we can stop him. Now is our time.
I'm voting in the European elections because Brexit has been a fucking mess.
Not just a mess, it's a national disaster.
It's stopping us from dealing with the issues that young people and pretty much everyone else actually care about.
Climate change.
The soaring rates of knife crime.
Actually sorting out the NHS.
Crippling inequality in our country.
And it's promoting hatred, anger, and intolerance.
I don't know about you, but I don't want my future and my generation defined by Brexit.
And so on May the 23rd, tell Nigel Farage and his Brexit buddies to fuck off once and for all. Are you with us?
Sign the pledge at www.scramnews.com/EU election.
That's a good unitary message too. I mean, obviously, I'd be voting Labour in these elections, but that could apply towards anybody. I mean, that is the broad anti-Brexit tent. Green, Labour, Lib Dem. I think a better way of confronting the climate crisis than this sort of trying to enlist the U.S. empire in it is to fundamentally anchor and name it in the fundamental corruption and rot and fundamental oligarchy and inequality of the U.S. political system. And Bernie Sanders is relentlessly on message doing that. I want to go to clip number 5. This is a new Sanders ad, which people should be passing these around. The media operation there is doing a really good job. Please, of course, consider this contrast with Joe Biden saying, I'm not looking to soak the rich, while jetting between Hollywood and New York to gobble up oligarch money. This is Bernie Sanders on the fossil fuel industry, subsidies, and tax breaks.
It is time to end all subsidies and tax breaks for the oil and gas companies.
According to the IMF,
An IMF report found that direct and indirect subsidies for coal, oil, and gas in the United States reached $649 billion in 2015. In the last decade alone, the oil and gas industry has pumped more than $700 million worth of campaign contributions into federal, state, and local elections. During that same period, they spent more than $1.5 billion lobbying Washington. Maybe providing massive support, federal support, to an industry that is destroying our planet makes sense to some people, but sure as hell does not make sense to me.
That's the fundamental connection there. The fundamental corruption of it and the fundamental confrontation that needs to happen. That's what needs to be put across. And, you know, Joe Biden is part of that rot he's talking about. And when you watch that video or think about these actual issues, I mean, you just, with a certain, Buddhist distance, just roll your eyes and dismiss all of the endless talkers and mediocre idiots in sort of, subpar media that have decided to fixate on and hate Bernie Sanders, because it's truly pathetic relative to the types of issues and things that this campaign is foregrounding. JB, some birds may die from getting hit by wind turbine blade. Even entire species will die from permanently changing the global ecosystem. Yes. Jay Cool. Hey, Michael, do you know why Trump cares so much about this trade war with China? Do you think he has friends or investments in the handful of corporations that may benefit? I mean, that's always my assumption with Trump, that there's something like that. I don't know, but
I mean, if you listen to Trump's appearances on conservative talk radio for like the last few decades, he loves this sort of stuff.
Right. I mean, he does go back he was like one of those big like Japan guys in the 80s, right? I mean, he does have a consistency on trade war stuff and bigotry.
Which isn't to say he understands it terribly well. He just likes the posturing.
And he gets the instincts of it, and he's a bigot. And he's competitive, Gregory from Nebraska. I've been receiving a lot of love and support from everyone in the Left is Best community after starting my podcast. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's reached out or tried to help. Oh, that's awesome. But Greg, you got to remind us what the name is. What is the name of Gregory?
The Green Corn Rebellion Show.
Green Corn Rebellion Show. Check it out. Pickpocket Kettrick. Zion is going to New Orleans. Matt, not a fan of that. Winnipeg Greg. Michael, I want to thank you and the crew for a lovely, informative episode yesterday. That being said, I've got some feedback for the next episode centered on Winnipeg labor history. I'm thinking that the 18th anniversary end of the Bueller-Bastille lockout this summer is a great opportunity to address that. Let me know when you're scheduling that interview, and I'll send you my notes. Okay. I would appreciate what you got, buddy.
I've been to Winnipeg. I need to listen to that interview.
You're calling from a 720 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, is this me?
Yep.
Oh no.
Hello?
Figure. Oh, no. Come on. Hey. This is Eric from Colorado.
Hey, Eric. What's on your mind?
So the libertarian socialist that called in a while ago, he got up some things that I agree with, actually.
Okay.
I'm an anarchist. Well, one thing that Sam said that I do not agree with.
Okay, Sam said that you do not agree with. I will pretend to be Sam for about 30 seconds. Okay,
right,
so you're an
cool.
anarchist. How would that work?
Oh, horribly. But
well, that's my
what
concern.
he said about direct democracy, I really took issue with.
I'm sorry. You got to reset it. Who said? Okay, what did Sam say about direct democracy? I certainly don't remember.
He basically just said that it could not work, that the country's too big.
Okay. So you don't think that there might be some literal logistical limits in that type of thing? Because I
think there are some legitimate logistical
I think that's
limits,
all he was saying.
I think that it's also there's a lot of the reason that I wanted to call in was that Mike Gravel, who's running in 2020, he is like mainly running on a legislator of the people, and he hasn't come out with his book yet. I think it's supposed to come out before the debates. I'm not sure about that, but he's done a lot of work on this, and I'm not honestly the most well-researched on this, but
I don't know anything about it.
I just think...
Yeah,
well, I just wanted to, I guess, bring up Mike Gravel. He has a lot of policies that I actually really agree with.
Cool.
That actually kind of put him above Sanders for me.
Here's my
is he actually even running, or is this like a weekend at Bernie's situation?
My thing.
I mean, I'm still voting for Sanders.
Okay, great. That's all I care about. I think Mike Gravel's got a cool Twitter feed, and it's great, but we got to get Bernie.
Really trying to be president, so
yeah.
He's mostly just trying to get on the debates.
That makes it easier.
Yeah, but I mean, this is like, yeah. I mean, anything that cuts into Bernie's totals when things actually start happening are gonna piss me off.
Yeah.
So, but it's cool. Mike Gravel's cool. Yeah.
I mean, I think most of the people who are supporting him are mostly just giving him $1 and then supporting either.
All right, so
I think he endorsed Gabbard.
All right, cool. All right, so we've got Gravel. He is noted. Thanks for the call, brother.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Thank you.
You are welcome.
I don't know that I'd be surprised if Gravel has sort of addressed the issues with logistics of direct democracy for,
I mean, look, I think
$750 million.
It's so much more interesting to think about how you could turn companies into democracies, which is in fact radical and is in fact democratic socialist. But I don't see any scenario, and again, should it be infinitely more transparent and people have way more power? Absolutely. But you don't want anything in your life delegated? I mean, I don't see how that works. I'd like to delegate more of my life.
It does not work.
I think people can be, and I do think look, there's and to the extent those things are there, like in the '88 Brazilian Constitution. I mean, there's a lot of local initiatives. I think it would be great, but even there, if you have a citizen review board of budgets, or you put citizens in control of things like rent control in New York, which you should do, you would still have, you still have that's still a form of delegation. I don't know what that means. I mean, if you're literally, there's a million different ideas of engaging people much more deeply in democracy in all levels, which I 100% support.
Yeah, but those are good conversations to have.
Those are great, and we should explore those ideas. But if you're literally saying everybody get on your touchscreen at the same time. Now vote. And I guess, as far as this election goes, it's I don't know, man. I take this really seriously. And I think, even in ways that really piss people off, to me, I'm sorry. I think in 2016, it would have been better if Warren was the candidate than Sanders. As a ardent Sanders supporter, I think she might have had a bit of a better chance. She was positioned to do that. I think in 2020, Sanders is undoubtedly the progressive leader, and I don't care how many policy proposals come out. And I don't see it. Look, if it changes, great. Or not, I won't say great because I support Sanders, but if it changes, that's another story. And Warren is the only other candidate in a general election that I would support with enthusiasm and energy. But I don't know. As I see it, I don't think that this is a primary winning candidacy, and I think it's going to take out of Sanders' vote. So I don't appreciate that. And I certainly don't appreciate, that was part of the reason that I was very critical of Tulsi out of the gate. I don't think Tulsi's more than a 1 or 2% candidate, even though she's putting forward some very good things. But if that 1 or 2% is the difference between Sanders over Biden, I have a big problem with that. Just as I have a big problem if even, Andrew Yang's 0.7% and, Mike Gravel's whatever. I think we got to do this here. I think we need a president who gets we need single payer. I think we need a president who's serious about what's happening with Iran, who's saying what he's saying about climate, about the structural corruption in this country. I think we actually need to do that.
Yeah, I don't want calls about Mike Gravel. The only thing I'm interested in Gravel is him as a propaganda agent.
Right.
And when you're calling into this show and we're talking about him and not Bernie Sanders, for instance, he's having the opposite effect that I want Gravel to have. So
then he's having a bad effect.
Yeah.
He's having a not good effect. But I will, of course, obviously Warren's in a different category, and she is running a very, serious candidacy. So this clip was great. I think, she does this so well of her just, basically destroying a Treasury official who was, as you know, Wells Fargo engaged in criminality against their customers, and Treasury did nothing about it. Here's Elizabeth Warren talking to Treasury official Joseph Otting.
Will you commit to publicly disclosing the OCC's evaluation of the, quote, competence, experience, character, or integrity, end quote, of the next Wells CEO?
I will not.
Why not?
Because it'll be confidential supervisory information.
Well, it's confidential if you make it confidential. Right. The point is you have the legal authority.
I do not have plans to release that information publicly.
And what is the reason that you don't have plans? Why are you keeping this secret?
As you indicated, it's my prerogative.
Okay, and our job is oversight here. So I'd like to know why you want to exercise your prerogative to keep secret
I haven't exercised
the oversight that the OCC has ducked repeatedly.
Senator Warren, no one has been more tougher on Wells Fargo than myself. No one has been more outspoken.
You mean at the OCC? That's a low bar.
I would disagree with that. I find that insulting that you would make that comment.
Good.
Oh, that's the energy we need.
Oh, that is the energy we need. So yeah, but you know what? Go vote for Joe Biden. Yeah. Go look at, Pete Buttigieg's I don't want to talk about gentrifying my mid-sized Indiana city, but I do have plenty of pablum for you. Look, again, I'm, ardent and consistent in why I think Sanders is clearly the best choice. But my God, there is another argument where it's just like these two verse, and you got to be fucking kidding me. Like, really? Beto O'Rourke over that?
Yeah.
Are you out of your mind?
9 out of 10 of the people running for, and there's obviously more than that, but 9 out of the 10 roughly are complete wastes of your attention and should be treated as such.
Absolutely. Do we have the View clip with Beto O'Rourke, speaking of which? Because I would like to play that. It's pretty funny. I hope we have that. I believe the women of The View had some questions about Beto O'Rourke's ongoing presence in the race. Now, I think not to, I think I've been kind of right about Biden so far, and I think I've been right about Beto so far, which is I was pretty early, I feel, saying this isn't going to amount to much. This guy's delusional. He's confusing. The mass adulation you're going to get when you're like a halfway paid up member of the human race and you're running against Ted Cruz. And he's confusing the energy he got from that candidacy with any type of like actual natural organic appetite for him to run for president. So it has really not surprised me at all that this hasn't gone off of the ground, and he still has an opportunity. Now, I think there's a candidate, Hernandez, who's already declared, and she's who I'd vote for in a Texas primary because she seems to me to be the clear crusading progressive choice against Cornyn. At the same time, I know that Beto O'Rourke could buy himself a hell of a lot of goodwill. Just as even a total nothing like Hickenlooper, whatever the hell his name is, could have bought himself some goodwill by running for Senate. Beto O'Rourke could still avert this embarrassment and become a candidate for Senate against John Cornyn, but he's still running for president. And as the sort of momentary caffeine high or sugar high or whatever the hell that sort of embarrassing rollout was with that incredibly embarrassing Vanity Fair interview wears off, he's going to get more questions like this. Do we have this ready? Oh, damn it. I've been setting this all up. They didn't say it? What did they say? All right, then forget it. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Man, you want me to be like Sam?
You know what? Then just forget it. Don't play the clip.
I might have a.
I thought that what I had been led to believe was that somebody on The View asked him why he was running, still running, which is awesome.
No, but we instead have a Vic Berger clip.
All right, let's do. Is this about Beto? All right, let's do a Beto Vic Berger clip. Why not?
Turn it around.
Just double tap.
Double tap.
Is it working? There we go. Jesus Christ. What a fucking empty narcissist. Oh my God. Who's your comrade? There's a lot of talk of tech companies lately, and no one is discussing Amazon. Amazon's one of the largest tech companies. I'm sorry, that's not true. I think people are talking about Amazon all the time.
Yeah, I think there's a few that people discuss, and Amazon's right up there.
Yes, they're involved in cloud computing. They make most of their money. Okay, I got to keep.
Amazon's bad. Stamped.
Amazon is very bad, and they're talked about frequently. Kentucky Fried Comrade. Hey, MR crew, in light of the assault on women's reproductive rights, it's important to shout out the National Network of Abortion Funds at www.abortionfunds.org, which helps women in restrictive states both financially and logistically receive the care they need. Hashtag left is best. Yes, we should be tweeting that out. So, let's see. Is there any more? Oh, this is all right. Let's play this AOC sound. This is her at a oversight hearing asking, how does the FBI, what are their metrics for monitoring terrorism? Now, I find, these conversations to be very complicated because on one hand, look, there is a small, very vanishingly small, but there is an actual threat that are posed from groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda. There's a more significant, at this time, threat posed by white supremacists and neo-Nazi and KKK groups in this country. And clearly this is an administration that the Trump administration winks at and plays footsie with those forces. And going back to the Obama administration, there was a massive Republican meltdown about a Homeland Security report on the danger posed by far-right groups. And then at the same time, this is all in the context of I want to repeal the Patriot Act. I want to pare down Homeland Security, and I don't want to use the language of terrorism, security, and surveillance to describe everything because we already have a really dangerous situation in this country in terms of incarceration and civil liberties, and even in terms of thinking structurally and culturally of how you actually deal with extremism, whether it's neo-Nazism or Al-Qaeda. So these are really important things you need to put in the mix. But what AOC is foregrounding at this hearing on ethnicity and identity is also very important. So let's check it out.
The Bernardino attack of December 2nd, 2015 was labeled as a domestic terrorist incident. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Mr. Austin, do you know the June 12th, 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting was also labeled as a domestic terrorist incident, correct?
That's my understanding.
Mr. Salim, when Dylan Roof, a 21-year-old white supremacist, entered the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church and murdered 9 African-American worshipers, was that labeled as an incidence of domestic terrorism?
I don't believe it was, but there's no question that it was.
So it was, in your belief as a leader in this space, it was an incidence of domestic terrorism, but it was not labeled as such.
That's correct.
Was the white supremacist shooting at Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue labeled as a domestic terrorist incident?
I'm not aware that it was, although then Attorney General Sessions came out and called it that, but the charges that have been brought to bear and are currently playing out in court are not ones of terrorism.
So despite all of that rhetoric that we were hearing, they weren't actually labeled, these white supremacist incidents were not labeled as domestic terrorist incidents. And I really dug into some of these distinctions. What was labeled as domestic terrorism? What was labeled as a hate crime? And I could not help but, as much as I tried to dig in and explain, I could not help but feel and see that attacks committed by Muslim Americans were almost automatically labeled as domestic terrorist incidents, yet white supremacist shooting after shooting after shooting is not. And I can't help but come to the conclusion that these labels, what's being labeled as terrorism, is almost exclusively coming down to the identity. And it seems as though white men invoking white supremacy and engaging in mass shootings are almost immune from being labeled domestic terrorists in their violence.
That's absolutely true. Now, those are broader context questions that I think are important, but that's undoubtedly true. And of course, reflected in this administration policy. Just recently, they will not sign on to a sort of global condemnation effort on Christchurch, and they're saying it's because of concern about quote-unquote free speech issues, which is, as we know, free speech issues are marshaled by fascists often. Let's play one final piece of sound because this is just kind of funny. So Intuit, which is a tax service, they offered a free tax filing software. That's something that they've been very publicly facing that they offer this software, right? I mean, but what they were less publicly facing about is that they basically made in Google searches it significantly harder for people to access the free service. Now, another element of taxes, in addition to the fact that, of course, that they need to be infinitely more progressive, and of course the fact that, you know, the wealthy evade taxes and the IRS is drained of funds to apprehend all of the stolen wealth by the wealthy and corporations. There is a third element that actually they could be much less complicated to deal with, and part of the reason they aren't complicated to deal with is because companies like H&R Block and Intuit have influence in Congress. So that's another stream of the tax conversation. So, and I'm quoting now from ProPublica, the company promised the IRS would offer free options to tens of millions of taxpayers earning less than $34,000. In responding to our reporting, which shows that Intuit and H&R Block and other for-profit tax software companies were steering customers to their paid products. So they were available. We're going to do a big PR blitz that we have them. But in actuality, in search terms, we're going to push these people that need relief to our paid services. Now, the answer as to why they would do this is, I guess, obvious to anybody with any kind of functioning brain. But the CEO of Intuit, Sazan Gadzari, had an amazing, and shall I say, innovative answer as to why they were doing this.
Our choice around search was intended to be the best interest of taxpayers so they were more fully informed about their options and could choose what they felt was best for them. But given the misinterpretation of our well-intended actions, we decided to remove the limitations we'd put in place.
So he's literally saying, and I think he reminds us of one of our old friends that we'll get to in a second, but he's literally saying, we offered a free option, we made a big show of it, then we juked Google so people couldn't find the free option. They were put into our paid services. And the reason we did this is because we want people to take their tax-paying. This is because we take, their responsibility seriously. He's given a Paul Ryan spiel for this con. He also sounds like another great American.
Between the White House and their press corps. So we'll see what happens in the end, but that relationship absolutely needs to be repaired, as we said on a recent Bottom Line with Boris.
Matt, how many more subscribers does Literary Hangover have now, more than Boris Epstein's YouTube channel?
Probably
loads
more.
We've been well lapping.
I think I might have more patrons than he has subscribers on YouTube.
All right, well, Matt looks that up. Let's take the last call of the day. You're calling from a 718 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling
332.
From?
By the way,
You're calling from a 718 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Greg from New York. You hear me? Hello?
Greg
New York.
from New York. How are you, Greg? I think you know the ground rules, or Peter comes
Ground
out.
rules.
How are you, Greg? What's on your mind?
Well, good, man. I actually agree with a lot. You had Ocasio-Cortez on. Just wanted right off the bat to say, so you don't pin me to it. I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders. I think she's spot on about the terrorists and the color of their skin, et cetera, et cetera. So I totally agree with that. But I just wanted to say with your Australian caller, and you're saying about the book, How We Win a War of Ideas, you got to look at the larger picture, man. Your radio show is obviously on the left, and that's cool, and I love listening to it. But the American populace essentially has a self-described nationalist, which is Donald Trump, and he energizes the right to hope he will be even more nationalist than he actually is. And then you have a self-described socialist, which is simply a fact, but he's really a social democrat.
Okay, Greg.
Yep,
What's
yep,
the question, or the comment? I mean, if that's
Well,
your
you have
comment,
to
that's
understand-
cool.
So you got to understand there's a palpable fear on both sides. So you understand the fear on the left of nationalism, and totally that's right. Okay. But on the right, there's a palpable fear of socialism. And I think that's misguided also in some ways. But they point to Venezuela, they point to USSR, and you need to address those things in order for people to accept left ideas.
Okay.
It's just
Well,
literally
Bernie is
nationalism.
definitely not advocating a Venezuela scenario or a USSR scenario, so people can rest easy and take deep breaths. Greg, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. I mean, I'm not even trying, like, there is some truth to that, but I also think that, like, the distinction between the handful of people that we need to be clear in our communication about that with versus the relentless cynicism of right-wing media and politicians
Right.
about that.
They're going to call Seth Moulton a socialist.
I mean, that's the other thing. They're going to call it right. Exactly.
Greg call. Is it the same Greg?
That's the same Greg.
Okay. We didn't have
And
that
he's
number
trying his
saved.
best, and we're being assholes, but it's such a funny drop. We love you. Well, we like you, Greg. We like you. All right. Sorry. No more calls.
I mean,
for
at
the
this
day.
frequency, it's fine.
At this frequency, it's totally fine. And I mean, I get the point, but I also, you know, there's also like, what are you going to do? I mean, you know, that's the thing too, is like, you know, are you calling in? I don't know. Maybe he is. Maybe Greg might be calling into like Rush Limbaugh shows and saying like, hey, don't be a nationalist, or, you know, or recognize that people are scared. But, you know, I don't know. Okay. I get it. People
You're
are
getting
scared.
Medicare for all. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Like, the phantoms in
Yeah,
your mind.
I am sorry you're having an anxiety attack, but we're going to give you clean air and
A
health care.
specter is haunting America.
Sir, I am sorry that you're absolutely terrified, but we are going to put your child, if they choose to go to college, for free. Your child's asthma will also be helped because we're not going to be polluting the air as much. I'm sorry that this freaks you out. Tomcat, hi guys. Just to ask if the TMBS Food Challenge is happening next week. It's my 30th birthday next Wednesday. TMBS goes on at midnight in the UK, and it's not often I'm able to watch live due to my work schedule. So I'd love to spend the first hours of my 30s watching you gag over what the hell is in the. But yes, we're going to do it.
The mukbang.
I don't. By the way, I don't. I very likely will tap out after one bite. So I do not commit to eating a lot of that food. I think 6 p.m. ish Eastern NYC time. Let's see. Dirty 530. Can I get a shout out to Audrey Denning running for California First? She's running a grassroots campaign against Doug LaMilfia, who visited the U.S.-Mexico border with Trump a month or so ago. Audrey doesn't take big donor dollars like he does. Yes, shout out to her. Wolverine. Soon in Alabama will be improbably illegal to practice self-love. Right, that's what I just said. Binder Dad. Bullwinkle is an alumni of Watsmata U. Okay. All right. The final I am of the day. I have to find a good final I am. Let's see.
You have a wonderful day, bro, and I'll see you again soon.
Gramps Pasachas. Is it me or has Jordan Peterson already started to evaporate from the zeitgeist? Love the show. You sit on a throne of ideas and it hurts my brain. I think that they are still extremely influential and they matter and they're sort of the prototype of modern right-wing arguments. But yes, I mean, the level of exposure and obsession was bound to significantly decrease.
I mean, there's not a lot new there. People
yeah, right.
It's
also, that's the other thing. It's not like this guy is a particularly fluid thinker. There's a huge amount of repetition. So we will, I guess Sam's upstate, but of course there's a show tomorrow. We'll be in the studio. Hopefully there'll be some tech problems. Can you hear me? We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I get some